So, Writers Week happens through the efforts of a lot of people. Tomorrow night that we hope you come to. It will be a performance of the Just Break Up podcast. It is free for you to attend, and we think it's going to be a really great time. So grab your friends, bring them back, and get ready to be entertained. It will be Sierra Mulder and Sam Blackwell, who are hosts of the Just Break Up podcast, and they will be here with us. So today I have two graduates who never met before today, but lots of people, including me, are telling them that they are going to be best friends by the time the hour is over. So Elise Leibovich graduated from Fremd in 2001, and Tamar Alexanian graduated from Fremd in 2012. And when Mr. Anderson and I were thinking about how we were going to celebrate Writers Week 30, um, it's the student performance hours that are always the most popular. We thought if we can figure out a way to bring that energy back, that would be amazing. And so we invited a bunch of our graduates, and we got such high energy responses. They were dropping everything in their adult lives to come back here to Fremd and celebrate Writers Week 30 with all of us. And we appreciate it so much. We do not take them for granted for a second. So as a way to have some fun with some different eras of Writers Week, we gave each grad the prompt to frame their presentation around a different Taylor Swift song. She is, after all, Time Magazine's Person of the Year. And their presentation will not be about a specific song, but inspired by that. They might share a story about a time they were able to shake it off, or about a specific cruel summer, the last time they were fearless, or maybe it's about karma. Whatever they choose to speak on, I know that you will enjoy yourself tremendously. Okay, so first up, help me welcome Tamar Alexanian to the Writers Week stage.
Okay, cool. I'm Tamar. Back in the fall of 2011, with my mouth full of braces, and my old school assignment notebook clutched to my chest, I would walk to Mr. Romano's 6th period AP psychology class. Mr. Romano was an excellent teacher in all the ways you want a teacher to be excellent. He made us laugh, he let us eat during class, and he never marked a slate no matter how tardy we were. Mr. Romano's class was also so thoroughly entertaining that I often left thinking, well, that was great, but we really didn't do anything productive. Only to discover that when I got home and opened my psychology textbook, he had somehow tricked us into learning all of the psych concepts we needed to learn. I hope all of you get to experience an excellent teacher like that. Anyway, Mr. Romano was great, but he also scared me a tiny little bit. Anyone who has met Mr. Romano is probably confused by what I just said. You're talking about that retired social studies teacher who still hangs out with all the cool Fremd English teachers, right? The Italian guy with the really short legs who's always smiling. Yep, that's the one. Mr. Romano scared me just the tiniest bit because he was the only teacher I ever had who did not appreciate how much of an overachiever I was. And let me tell you, I was an A+ overachiever. One time, one of my teachers, who may or may not be in this room right now, offhandedly said he would give us extra credit if we brought coconut macaroons to class. So I showed up the next day at 7:30 a.m., first period, with a small container of uniformly perfect coconut macaroons. As I handed the teacher this extra credit assignment, he says, "Oh, I meant coconut macaroons for the entire class, not just a small container for me, but don't worry about it." But of course I was gonna worry about it. What about my extra credit? So I went home and I baked more perfectly uniform coconut macaroons and delivered them to class at 7:30 a.m. the next day. I assume my fellow classmates tolerated this ridiculous behavior because it resulted in baked goods for them. Anyway, Mr. Romano didn't seem to find my overachieving habits nearly as impressive as all of my other teachers did. In fact, I had overheard Mr. Romano talking about how he actually liked teaching non-AP classes more because the AP kids were sort of intense. Can you believe that? AP kids sort of intense? But the thing that scared me the most was that on every assignment I ever handed in, Mr. Romano would write, "Good, now go ride your bike." That was it. The first time Mr. Romano passed one of my assignments back with a note on top, I rushed to cover up my paper, stunned with embarrassment. I tried to glance nonchalantly around the room to see if my classmates' papers had the same admonishment. Nope, just me. Maybe he'd made some sort of mistake, I concluded, trying to reduce the red creeping into my cheeks while putting my paper back in my backpack. But then he wrote on my next assignment, and my next assignment, and my next assignment. What does a comment like that even mean? Was I supposed to laugh? Was it a joke? Did I need to ride a bike to get a better grade? I mean, come on. Who had time to ride a bike? And actually, I hated riding bikes. I was just there to learn a little bit about psychology, get a good grade, get some college credit, and I would be on my way. No coconut macaroons for you, Mr. Romano, and no bike riding for me. 3 years later, I was standing in front of a white bicycle with a cute little woven basket in Copenhagen, Denmark, on a freezing cold January morning. My host family, including my host dad Ulrich, my host mom Karen, and my host little sister Ida, were all towering behind me. Danes are astonishingly tall, for those of you who don't know, and I am 5'4" and 3/4, waiting patiently for me to mount my bike. During dinner the night before, Ulrich had offhandedly said, "We have your bike and helmet all ready for you. We'll take you on a practice ride tomorrow to make sure you know all the Danish biking rules and customs and to prepare you for your biking course." It was true. I had signed up for an urban studies course called Bikeable Copenhagen, taught completely while riding a bike. But I had partially signed up for the course because the woman at Vanderbilt's study abroad office said that the study abroad program in Copenhagen was sort of hard to get into, and that I would have a better shot of getting in if I signed up for Danish cultural courses like that one. I figured if I hadn't sufficiently warmed up to the idea of taking a class that was taught while biking around a city in the freezing cold winter in Denmark by the time class started, I would just switch to a different class. No problem. So there I was, in front of my host family, struggling to mount my bike because the bottom of my knee-length black puffy winter coat kept getting caught on the seat cushion, wondering why I hadn't changed my class schedule yet. Off we went, 3 blonde, tall host family members and me, around their quaint neighborhood. I realized as we rolled up to the house a half hour later, the lesson thankfully over, that I was going to be stuck biking for the entire semester in the Danish freezing cold. And that's exactly what I did. Twice a week, I would meet up with 30 other students and we'd follow behind my unbelievably elegant teacher as we biked all over Copenhagen. I hoped to never be as cold as I was biking around that semester, half paying attention to the words reverberating through my headphones that connected to my teacher lecturing, and half trying to figure out how the same teacher was always wearing high heels while she was biking. Do I wish I had switched into another class when I had the chance? Nope. It was one of the coolest ways I've ever earned class credit. And for all of you fellow overachievers and AP kids out there that are on the edge of your seats, I got an A in that class. I came back from taking my Bikeable Copenhagen class, and I still didn't like biking very much. But on top of that, the class had turned me into a biking culture snob. The US doesn't have the infrastructure to protect bikers, I would say anytime anyone mentioned biking around me. We have a lot of injuries and fatalities here that are completely avoidable if we just instituted better infrastructural mechanisms to protect bikers. Yes, I had taken exactly 1 urban studies course and was now sounding like a complete asshole. But I figured this new perfectly sound reasoning would keep me far away from biking for a while. And it did, for about 2 years. That's when I somehow found myself careening down a giant mountain on an unpaved road in Taiwan on a bike. I had gone on exactly 3 dates with this guy, Adam, before I moved to Taiwan for a 1-year teaching position, which is not how I had imagined starting a solid relationship. So after a few months of sending him snail mail letters, I worked up the courage to ask him to visit me in Taiwan. I asked him in a letter that I had written and rewritten again, trying to make sure every word was exactly right, that the ink from my pen didn't smudge anywhere on the page. I think we have something special here, I wrote, pretending to be more sure of myself than I actually was. I think we should give this a try. So Adam flew halfway around the world for a one-week visit to Taiwan, and I planned a week-long trip for us traveling around the island. I figured that was the least I could do after he spent $800 and about 18 hours to get to me. Obviously, there are many potential problems with planning a week-long trip in a foreign country with your sort of boyfriend who you've only been on 3 dates with. But my biggest problem was that Adam spoke zero Mandarin, and I had learned a grand total of about 20 words since I moved there. So I was trying to act all cool and in control in front of Adam while simultaneously not understanding the vast majority of what anyone was saying to us at any time. Which is how we ended up in an old green truck with a pudgy hostel owner who did not speak any English. When we woke up that morning, the hostel owner and I had played a form of charades that I had grown very accustomed to in a country where I didn't speak the language. After a little bit of back and forth, I turned to Adam and I said, "Okay, we're good. He's gonna drive us up a nearby mountain so we can take a nice scenic hike, and he'll come and pick us up at the end of the trip." I was beaming with confidence and excitement, double knotting my gym shoes for good measure before hopping excitedly into the truck. But when we got to the top of the mountain, the hostel owner lowered the bed of his truck and started taking a rusty bike out. I looked at Adam, still trying to play it cool. Maybe the hostel owner was gonna take the bike around a little bit while he waited for us to be done with our hike. But after putting the first bike down on the ground, he reached back into the truck and pulled out a second bike, and it finally dawned on me that I had definitely lost the game of charades that morning. Adam and I needed to bike down the mountain and get back to the hostel by ourselves. There would be no pickup service. Adam and I have been together for 8 years now. When we tell the story of our fourth date, aka his one-week trip to Taiwan, he always tells people that he knew he was falling in love with me when he watched me get on the bike, throwing caution to the wind, and start careening down the mountain in Taiwan. I didn't tell him for many years that I actually hate biking. 4 years after that, the pandemic happened. I had been in South Africa studying abroad during law school when the pandemic hit. With nowhere else to go, I found myself in a one-bedroom bungalow beach house with 7 other members of Adam's outrageous family and a dog during the summer of 2020. Adam had at this point turned into my fiance and had promised this would be a great idea. "We'll be at the Jersey Shore while we work remotely and we wait for the pandemic to blow over," he had exclaimed. "This is great. Who doesn't love the beach?" I mean, I like the beach just as much as the next person, but what I didn't like was staying in the same room as my fiance's sister, his mom, his dad, his aunt, his cousin's fiance, and his cousin's fiance's dog, all in various stages of undress. And the worst part was, Adam's family had a horrible habit of riding bikes every night after dinner. It was like clockwork. Before the last person had even finished eating, his dad would rush out of the door to prep the bikes, including putting flashing lights on both the front and the back for safety. The first few times it happened, I smiled tightly and I suffered through the slow and lazy bike ride. But once I realized this was to be a nightly habit, I put my foot down. "Dr. B," which is what I called Adam's dad because he's a retired dentist and also very eccentric, "I'm going to stay back. I don't really like biking." It was like a scene in a movie where everyone stops moving and stares aghast at the person who just dropped horrible news. "You don't like biking?" Dr. B responded incredulously. It was as if I had said, "I don't like puppies," or "I don't like sunshine." They were being very dramatic. "No, not really," I replied. "What is there not to like?" "Well, American infrastructure," I started, and then I rethought my strategy. There was virtually no cars on the wide one-way street we biked, and Dr. B put on so many flashing and neon lights on the bikes that to object for safety reasons was definitely a losing argument. "I would ride if someone else was dealing with the steering," I finally said, matter-of-factly. I picked up my plate and I put it in the sink, ignoring everyone's eyes staring at the back of me. Everyone else went on the bike ride that night without me, and I was in heaven, blissfully reading my book in the tiny bungalow house alone for the first time in weeks. I had finally hit the jackpot. And the next morning I was in the middle of a Zoom meeting when I heard Adam burst out laughing while looking out the window. "What is it?" I said, barely looking up from my laptop. But Adam would not stop laughing. In fact, he was now holding his stomach and gasping for breath, still looking out the window. "What is it?" I repeated more impatiently. When I realized Adam wouldn't be able to pull it together anytime soon, I walked over to the window to see for myself what all the fuss was about. And parked at the curb was Dr. B's giant black car, the trunk halfway open, with something large sticking at least 5 feet out the back. How did he drive with that giant thing sticking out? I thought to myself. And then it dawned on me. That giant thing was a tandem bicycle. A tandem bicycle just for me. "You said you don't like steering," Adam said while wiping a tear from one of his eyes. "Problem solved." Every summer since then, whenever Adam and I are back at my in-laws' beach house, the tandem bike comes out and I have to hop onto the back. There really are no other excuses that would work. It would be great to end this piece by saying, "And now I'm an avid bike rider. I'm training for a giant cross-country trip. But I still absolutely hate biking, so that's not where the story is going." These rides have, however, taught me a number of good lessons. Copenhagen biking taught me, of course, how to sound like a pretentious asshole about biking infrastructure and safety. But more importantly, it taught me how vivid, how important, and how meaningful learning experiences could be in the real world outside of the four walls of a classroom and a textbook. Taiwan biking taught me the importance of using Google Translate instead of playing a game of charades when there are language barriers. But more importantly, it taught me that big risks with love and with biking sometimes have the biggest rewards. And New Jersey biking taught me that my in-laws are persistent as hell and that I will never again have a moment of quiet to read by myself in the tiny bungalow beach house. But more importantly, it taught me that sometimes you just have to get into having fun. It is, as most of you probably already know, annoying as hell when teachers are right. But Mr. Romano sort of nailed it on this one. 17-year-old me could not have even imagined all of the life lessons I would learn while begrudgingly pedaling through all of these unexpected places. Now all of you, go ride a bike.
Hello. Thank you to my new best friend, Tamar. We just met a few minutes ago and we're best friends already, which is pretty nice. So 30 years of Writers Week. I can't believe it. I want to thank Ms. Ink and Mr. Anderson for inviting me back here, not just as a presenter, but also being so gracious many, many years, letting me just come back and lurk in the shadows to absorb it all. As a whole, I credit Writers Week for giving me a sense of belonging and community during high school, and it's so heartwarming to see how it's had that same effect on so many other students for 3 decades now. My first experience attending Writers Week was my freshman year, which was in 1998, when my Spanish teacher brought us to the auditorium to hear Gwendolyn Brooks speak, which was pretty amazing. And it blew my mind. I had no idea what we were coming in here for. I don't know if Mr. Gertoni, who's one of my closest friends, is in the house, but he and I were, we were sitting in that back row in the middle, and we both just were like, what is this? And it was amazing, and I went on to skip my next 3 classes in order to get my book signed by her, and it's one of my favorite memories. The following year was the first time in 1999 that I spoke during Writers Week as a student, and I was sitting right around over there when someone asked Jane Hamilton, who's a Midwestern author, if she had any advice for aspiring writers, and her reply was, remember everything. And I never forgot that. And it's been a driving force in my writing then and still now. I even bought myself a ring recently that has the word remember engraved on it. So sticking with the era's theme, I felt like the most obvious choice was Welcome to New York, because that's where I ended up after I graduated from here in 2001. I expected a lot of things from moving to New York City, but something I never could have fathomed was living within a mile of a terrorist attack. And yet, that is how my first year of college began. I didn't know anyone there yet, and I had only been in school for 3 days, so I spent a lot of time by myself, writing that day and the week following, and sending what I wrote home in email to friends and family and a lot of teachers here as well. So this is a poem I wrote to help remember some of the personally more mundane details of September 11th, and it's called This Is What I Remember. Standing on Fifth Avenue, camera in hand, the girl next to me sobbing into a cell phone. He's in there and people are just standing here taking pictures. And I kept shooting. Talking to my best friend Jenny on the phone, the Pentagon exploding on my TV screen. She said, "We're at war, I don't want to hang up with you." And I hung up the phone. Anticipating a love letter, the emptiness of my mailbox. Returning a VHS tape to Hollywood Video, staring at masked faces on the way. Am I in a movie? But I also can't breathe. Jumping over a rain puddle the night before, giggling while wondering out loud, what would happen if lightning struck a skyscraper? But an airplane? No, an airplane never crossed my mind. And so our brains are like a funny thing. They kind of, prevent us from really fully experiencing trauma in the moment. And so it wasn't until years later that I really started to feel the effects of what I actually witnessed that day. And when that happened, it would just instantly transport me back. And so this next poem is one that I wrote years later after I spent a day at the Art Institute. And it's called The Modern Wing, a poem in 3 parts. 1. The new Modern Wing opened at the museum, and on the last day of celebratory free admission and the start of Memorial Day weekend, I walked through the slender glass doors. The first piece of art I come across is a picture hanging on the wall outside the photography wing. It's a rooftop view of the lower Manhattan skyline. I watch 2 girls point at it, share some thoughts, and walk away. The thing is, before that day, there wouldn't really be a reason to take a second glance at this photo. But as the 2 girls walk away, I step forward close enough that I forget I'm in a museum, and I remember what those towers looked like, and I remember that plane, its wings outstretched, and I remember the smell of cremation, and I remember being 18. As my chest tightens and I will myself to the present, I notice there are 2 topless girls in the photo, smiling at each other on an adjacent rooftop, their arms outstretched towards the sky, mimicking the structures towering behind them. When Epstein captured this moment on film in 1998, I imagined this was the subject within the bigger picture. 2. Upstairs, there is an entire room decorated in United States wallpaper, and on each wall there is a framed full-page spread of the New York Times, all from September 12th. The artists sketch bodies embracing atop the newsprint and the black and white photographs of people running and of people tumbling out of windows. I stumble around this room in a daze. The pastel states are scattered and separate on the walls. I remember what we are memorializing. I remember when this war started. I remember the death count overseas. I try to remember why this war began in the first place. The reason escapes me because there is no reason. 3. I leave the museum, and outside the Aon building stands on its own and looks eerily like one of the twins. I remember when there was one left standing. I remember when this was called the Standard Oil Building, and I remember what it felt like to see 0. Okay, so then fast forwarding a little bit. In 2003, while I was still living in New York, my cousin Jeff and his son Tyler is actually a senior here at Friend, but I think he had math this period and wasn't able to come, but if you are out there, Tyler, hello. His dad shared genealogy research with me, and using that information, I went on a little adventure to the Lower East Side and subsequently wrote this poem that same night. And it's called 109 Ludlow Street. Every time I ask about my great-grandfather, relatives deny knowing anything, except that his name was Michael and he died from a heart attack when my bubby was only 16. What I know of him are 6 stolen photographs, creased and slightly blurry. Rumors circulated that he came from somewhere in South America. On my bubby's deathbed, I asked her if the rumors of her dad rang true, I think she slightly shook her head, but I wouldn't swear to it. Maybe someone made it up to explain why she was named Juanita. Then a paper surfaced, naturalization certificate number 1423062. Immigrated from Russia through Ellis Island on May 5th, 1920, including a New York City address. Down East Broadway, down Pike, down Canal, turning left on Ludlow, just past Delancey before Katz's Deli on the corner of Houston. 82 years later, the air is still bitter. I am not wearing a jacket. The sky is white. There is more graffiti than people. I find the apartment building rising 6 stories above a tailor shop. Cross the street to stand closer to these bricks. Step in front of an oncoming car and jump back. Look at its license plate, my initials. Coincidence constantly mocks me. I am in the same doorway, on the same steps, my face pushed up against the same dirty glass window. A pigeon lands at my feet and cocks its head at the fire escape ladders the same way I do. I tell it I love its wings. I confess to the bird what's hidden behind walls and dragged behind boats. The city's at a standstill. Michael found Anne. She is my namesake. I'm going to keep walking and whispering to birds. Someday, I will be an ancestor. And a quick fun fact as I jump into this last piece is that I went back to see that building a few years ago, and as I was posing in front of the door for a picture that I could send home to all of these family members, someone came out of the building, and I don't know what I thought I was doing, but just very instinctively stuck my foot in the door and let myself right into that building and just went up and down the stairs as though I owned the place, holding my breath the whole time. And so I still kind of want to write an updated piece about what that felt like as well. Okay, so 20 years ago I studied abroad in Madrid, Spain. I'm glad we have that in common, yeah. And took full advantage of my passport to travel to 9 other countries besides Spain during that time. One of my classes was a travel writing class, and this is a letter I wrote to my dad that I turned in for an assignment. If I had to pick a new era for this particular piece, the closest I could find was Bejeweled. February 22nd, 2004. Dear Dad, remember 4 years ago in March when you were between jobs and had enough time to take Sherry and me to Mexico over our spring break? Bubby had died a week before we left, and therefore Mom could no longer join us. You had qualms about leaving her home alone, but we selfishly convinced you that it was necessary for us not to miss out on a vacation. Our last night in Riviera de Maya, you asked us to sit with you under the stars. You chose a spot somewhere past the intruding lights of the resort, and we planted ourselves atop white lounge chairs aligned in a row, listening to the tranquil water, reaching out, never grabbing hold, always shyly receding. You sang a few lines of Don McLean's Starry Night, the ones you knew by heart, and hummed the rest. For the next 2 hours, you talked about how people get stuck on life's trivialities and how love was all that really mattered, how badly you wanted us to experience that in the future. Neither of us said a word. Sherry might have been lulled to sleep by the sounds of the waves, but I was absorbing it all. You stressed the importance of family, especially with ours being so small, not knowing that October would kill your brother and December would steal your mother. Wow, you sighed. It's hard not to feel insignificant when there is such a vast sky overhead. The Mexican moon, a discarded nail clipping, nodded in agreement. I just got back to Spain from a weekend trip visiting Pat in Ireland. You remember him, right? He was the boy I became friends with when I turned 18, the one who played guitar in our living room with our other friend Matt for a whole week during winter break of my senior year when he thought it was a good idea to leave me home alone while you, Mom, and Sherry went to the Rose Bowl in California. He is studying abroad in Galway now. The second night I was there, we decided to take a bus an hour south of Galway to a 3-pub town called Doolin. We left as the sun was setting, both of us anxious for some hot Irish stew and traditional music. The bus dropped us off in front of the Doolin hostel. We sleepily dragged our feet towards the front door, but I happened to look up before we reached it. Pat must have heard my sharp intake of breath, or maybe I exhaled, wow. He turned around and I motioned towards the sky. Dad, you know that I used to get a thrill out of seeing a faint hint of the Big Dipper above our house in Illinois. That alone impressed me. Although I'd still stand in the cul-de-sac, always scanning the sky for any trace of other constellations before retreating inside to count the days until the next new moon. Maybe then there would be enough darkness to entice the stars to shine brighter. It was a lost cause. After dropping our stuff off in a room and eating dinner at the closest pub, Pat and I crisscrossed our way down Doolin's only main road in hopes of finding music in one of the two others. I walked with my face up most of the time, Pat calling out, right, left, to help me avoid getting hit by cars, I guess this is a theme in my work, coming from either direction. The sky was infected with stars. They spread contagiously, not leaving any black patch untouched. I was taught in 3rd grade astronomy that there are billions of stars burning throughout the galaxy, but I never expected such a fact to prove itself. Pub number 3 had what we were looking for. As the hour rolled on and the crowd thinned, we were able to sit at a wooden table only a few feet away from the cozy corner and could see the musicians' eyes closed, their fingers playing music from memory. I crossed my fingers before returning outside that the stars would still be there, that someone hadn't sneezed and carelessly blown them all away. They were all still there, perfectly placed pinholes. As we walked back, I recalled you singing Starry Night and smiled because it wasn't until a year after Mexico when we were in the Art Institute that you learned Van Gogh did not steal the title from Don McLean and that it was a painting before a song. Remnants of your voice in the Riviera trailed back to me, and I remembered what you said about never actually using your aeronautical engineering degree, about how you turned down NASA 3 times because your future wife didn't want to raise kids in Los Angeles. You could have built space shuttles, but instead you built a family. When the Tribune had a special section about the proposed space station on the moon a few years ago, I pointed it out to you. I would have been working on that. You said simply, if there was any regret mixed in, I did not hear it. If I could, I would have licked a stamp and sent those stars shooting across the Atlantic, leaving only streaks of fire above Ireland. I took my video camera out to try and document them for you, Dad, but they did not want to be caught on film, just like you. I felt like it was wrong to go to sleep then, to close my eyes to such a temporary, brilliant masterpiece, but the chilled Irish air led us to go inside. Pat and I turned the light off in our room and watched the sky for a few more minutes through the slanted window. In the morning, we walked to the ocean before our illegal trek across the cliffs of Moher. That's a story for a different time. We shuffled along eating our breakfast of champions. For me, an ice cream cone. For him, a miniature can of Pringles. Apparently, no one in Doolin eats before noon during the off-season. Neither of us talked much, but at one point, Pat stopped walking and said, "You know what's even crazier?" It's like he knew I had been still been dwelling on the night sky. All those stars are still up there right now. You just can't see them. Think about that. I'm thinking of you. Love, Elise.
Well, of course, 7th hour. You can see why we had to invite these 2 graduates back to share their stories and their writing with you. So please, one more round of applause for Tamar and Elise. And we just have maybe 1 minute, but if you want to share a Writers Week memory or a general friend memory.
That's tough because I would have said the Gwendolyn Brooks story, which I already said, but that was pretty incredible. I think just in general, the caliber of writers that Writers Week has brought in consistently this entire time. Like when I tell people, even just I had a PD, I'm a high school librarian, and we just had a very, very boring PD all day last Friday. And at the end of the presentation, she put something up on the screen and said, if you guys want to come to Florida for this, and we were all like, oh my God, no. But one of the presenters is Nikki Giovanni, and I raised my hand and I was like, she came to my high school, and she was like blown away. I'm like, oh yeah, I have a stack of books this big signed by Nikki Giovanni. So yeah, Writers Week is like the most magical thing at Friend, and I'm just so happy that it's still going strong.
I came back yesterday to see Mary Fons because I still love her, and I had a very embarrassing moment with her. Oh. She apparently saved my Writers Week thank you note and has it on her fridge. So all of you who are forced to write thank you notes, you can.